I leveraged my career to gift my parents a $50,000 anniversary gala. But when I arrived, they seated me at the sticky toddler table while my siblings took the stage. So, I made one phone call and canceled the entire event mid-toast. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The exhaustion settled deep in my bones, a heavy, throbbing ache that radiated from the soles of my feet all the way up to the base of my skull. It was the kind of fatigue that usually signaled the end of a 70-hour work week, the kind that demanded a glass of wine and 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep. But tonight, sleep was an impossibility. Tonight was the night I had been working toward for 6 months. Tonight was the night I finally proved to Adeline and Matthew, my parents, that I was more than just the artsy drifter they had labeled me a decade ago. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the bridal suite of the Grand Obsidian Hotel, smoothing the fabric of my navy silk gown. I looked professional, polished, and most importantly, successful. As the regional director of hospitality partnerships for the Obsidian Group, I wasn't just a guest at this party. I was the reason the party existed. "You look fine, Eva." "Stop fussing," I whispered to my reflection, trying to calm the flutter of anxiety in my chest. My phone buzzed on the marble vanity. It was a text from the banquet manager, frantic about the floral arrangement on the main stage. I typed back a quick solution, swapped the lilies for orchids, charged the difference to my internal account, and took a deep breath. I had covered everything. The ballroom rental, which usually cost $25,000 for a Saturday night, was comped. The 3-course meal for 200 guests was discounted by 60%. The open bar, on me. In total, the market value of tonight's Ruby anniversary celebration for my parents was pushing $50,000. My contribution, all of it. I checked my watch. 6:45 p.m. The guests were arriving. The cocktail hour was in full swing in the atrium, and the doors to the main ballroom were about to open. I grabbed my clutch and headed for the elevator, my heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the polished tile. I needed to be downstairs to ensure the transition from cocktails to dinner was seamless. The elevator doors slid open on the mezzanine level, and the hum of conversation washed over me. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the savory richness of past hors d'oeuvres. I spotted my parents near the entrance, holding court. Adeline was wearing the emerald gown I had helped her pick out, and Matthew was laughing loudly at a joke told by one of his old golf buddies. They looked radiant. They looked proud. For a split second, I allowed myself to feel a swell of warmth. I had done this. I had given them this moment. I skirted the edge of the crowd, intending to do a final check of the table settings before the doors opened. I slipped into the ballroom, which was currently empty save for the waitstaff making final adjustments. The room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the round tables draped in ivory linen. The centerpieces were towering architectural marvels of white roses and hanging amaranthus. I walked toward the front of the room, where the head table was set on a raised dais. It was set for 6. My parents, obviously, and then 4 other seats. I assumed one was for me, and the others for my siblings, Haley and Owen, and perhaps Owen's wife. I scanned the place cards at the head table, smiling as I admired the calligraphy. Matthew, Adeline Haley, Mark Haley's husband. Owen, Jessica Owen's wife. I stopped. I blinked, confused, and read the names again. Matthew, Adeline Haley, Mark, Owen, Jessica, my name wasn't there. A cold drop of unease slid down my spine. It had to be a mistake. The banquet team must have printed the wrong card or misplaced it. I turned to the nearest table, table 1, reserved for close family and VIPs. My eyes scanned the cards. My aunt, my uncle, my grandparents on my father's side. No Eva. I moved to table 2. Nothing. Table 3. Nothing. Panic began to rise in my throat, acrid and sharp. I had planned this entire event. I had signed the contracts. I had tasted the menu. Where was I sitting? I pulled out my phone and opened the digital seating chart app that the event planner had finalized with my mother yesterday. I hadn't looked at the final draft because Adeline had insisted on handling the politics of the seating herself, claiming she didn't want me to stress over where to put Great Aunt Mildred. I typed Eva into the search bar. The app zoomed out, scrolling past the VIP section, past the dance floor, past the mid-tier friends and neighbors, all the way to the back corner of the room near the swinging kitchen doors. Table 19. I walked toward the back of the room, my legs feeling strangely numb. Table 19 was smaller than the others. It didn't have the tall, elegant floral centerpiece. Instead, it had a small, plastic bowl filled with crayons. There were no wine glasses. I looked at the place cards. Eva, Sophie, age 4, Braden, age 3, Liam, age 2, Nanny, TBA. I stared at the card with my name on it, beautifully written in gold ink, sitting next to a sippy cup. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis of a terminal illness. It was a deliberate, calculated erasure of my personhood. I wasn't the host. I wasn't the benefactor. I wasn't even a daughter. I was the babysitter. For a long, agonizing minute, I couldn't move. The ambient noise of the hotel, the clatter of silverware, the distant hum of the HVAC system faded into a buzzing silence. I stared at that table, table 19, as if it were a crime scene. The disrespect was so loud, so flagrant, it felt physical. A slap across the face would have stung less. I had spent weeks negotiating with the executive chef to get the filet mignon at a chicken price point. I had called in personal favors with the sommelier to upgrade the wine package. I had put my professional reputation on the line to ensure this night was perfect for them, and they had seated me next to the kitchen doors with the toddlers. Eva! Oh, good, you're here. The voice snapped me out of my trance. I turned to see Adeline bustling into the ballroom, her emerald dress rustling. She looked frantic, her eyes darting around the room, checking for imperfections. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, focusing on the centerpiece at a nearby table. "Mom," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "What is this?" She finally glanced at me, then followed my gaze to table 19. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, as if I were a child complaining about a scraped knee during a church service. "What is what?" she asked, adjusting her diamond earring. "My seat," I said, pointing to the place card. "I'm at the kids' table, next to the kitchen." Adeline let out a short, dismissive sigh. "Oh, Eva, honestly, don't make a scene. We had a bit of a squeeze with the numbers. The Westcotts RSVP'd late. You know how important they are to your father's golf club status, and we needed to open up 2 spots at table 4. It was a nightmare of logistics." "So you moved me?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady, "to the toddler table." "Well, it made the most sense," she said, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. "You're so good with the kids. Sophie and Braden love you. And honestly, the conversation at the head table is going to be very adult. Business talk, investments. Haley and Owen are in that world, you know. We didn't want you to feel bored or out of place." The breath left my lungs. Bored, out of place. "Mom," I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am the regional director of this hotel chain. I am the reason you are standing in this ballroom. I am the reason there is food on these plates." She laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that chilled me to the bone. "Yes, yes, and we appreciate the discount, darling. Really, we do. But let's be honest, this is your job. It's service. You're in hospitality. It's what you do. You serve people. Tonight, we just need you to help out with the family a little bit more. The nanny canceled at the last minute, and we can't have the grandkids running around during the speeches." She reached out and patted my cheek, a gesture that felt more like a ownership claim than affection. "Just be a dear and watch them until the cake is cut. Then you can grab a drink at the bar." "Okay." She didn't wait for an answer. She turned on her heel and glided away toward the entrance, where Matthew was waving her over. I stood there, frozen. The ballroom doors swung open and the guests began to flood in. The noise level rose instantly, laughter, greetings, the clinking of glasses. I saw my sister, Haley, walk in. She was wearing a silver sequin dress that caught every light in the room. She spotted me standing by the kids' table and offered a tight, pitying smile before turning to her husband, Mark, and whispering something. Mark chuckled and glanced back at me, shaking his head. Then came Owen, my brother, adjusting his cufflinks. He didn't even acknowledge me. He walked straight to the head table, pulled out the chair that should have been mine, and sat down, looking like a king surveying his kingdom. My stomach churned. I felt nauseous, hot, and cold all at once. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip table 19 over. I wanted to march up to the microphone and tell everyone exactly how much this party cost and who had actually paid for it. But I didn't. Instead, I watched as the waiter poured vintage Cabernet into Owen's glass, a Cabernet I had selected. I watched Adeline laugh at something the Westcott said, her hand resting on Matthew's arm. They looked so comfortable, so entitled. They thought they had won. They thought that because I was the nice one, the peacekeeper, the hospitality girl, I would just swallow this indignity like I had swallowed every other insult for 29 years. They thought I was trapped by my own desire for their approval. But as I looked at the kitchen doors swinging open and shut, smelling the faint odor of dish soap and sanitizer that wafted out, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, definitive severance. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They saw me as the help. They saw me as the staff. And they were right. I was the staff. I was the director. And as the director, I had the power to refuse service to anyone. To understand why Table 19 wasn't just an insult, but a declaration of war, you have to understand the hierarchy of the Whittaker family. My parents, Adeline and Matthew, were people who believed that image was the only currency that mattered. Matthew had been a mid-level executive in finance for 30 years, never quite reaching the C-suite, but spending as if he owned the company. Adeline was a community organizer, which mostly meant she sat on boards for charities she didn't donate to and judged the floral arrangements of her friends' funerals. Then there were the children. Haley, 35, was the golden child. She had married Mark, a corporate lawyer, right out of college. She had provided the requisite 2 grandchildren, Sophie and Braden. She was sharp, judgmental, and entirely dependent on her husband's income, yet she carried herself as if she had personally litigated every case he won. To my parents, Haley was established. Owen, 33, was the prince. He was a serial entrepreneur, which was family code for unemployed with expensive hobbies. He had started a craft brewery that failed, a tech consultancy that never had a client, and was currently developing an app. My parents had bylaid him out of debt 3 times in the last 5 years, costing them nearly $100,000. Yet, at every family dinner, Matthew would raise a glass to Owen's visionary spirit. And then there was me, Eva. I was the mistake. The accident born 4 years after they thought they were done. I didn't fit the mold. I didn't marry rich, and I didn't have a vision. I worked. I started bussing tables at 16 because my parents forgot to give me an allowance. I worked my way through college as a night auditor at a motel because they had spent my college fund on Haley's wedding. When I got a job at the front desk of the Obsidian Group, they laughed. A receptionist. Adeline had said, wrinkling her nose, "Well, I suppose someone has to answer the phones." They didn't see the long nights. They didn't see the promotions. They didn't see me move from front desk to event coordinator to sales manager to regional director. All they saw was that I worked in a service industry. To them, I was essentially a gloried maid. But when their 40th anniversary approached, suddenly my job mattered. "Eva, darling," Adeline had purred over the phone 6 months ago. "We want something elegant, and we know you have connections." I had been so desperate to please them. I wanted to show them that my service job had power. I wanted to give them a night so spectacular that they would finally have to look at me with respect. I pulled every lever I had. I used my yearly director's discretionary fund, a perk usually reserved for wooing massive corporate clients, to cover the venue. I called in favors from vendors I had fed business to for years. I curated the menu, the lighting, the music. I built this night brick by brick, hoping that when they stood on that stage, they would thank me, not just as a daughter but as a professional. I watched from the shadows near the kitchen as the appetizers were served. Adeline stood up, tapping her spoon against her champagne flute. The room went silent. "Welcome, everyone," she beamed, her voice amplified by the sound system I had set up. "Matthew and I are so touched to see you all here. 40 years. It hasn't always been easy, but we have built a life of love, integrity, and family." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "We have been blessed," Matthew added, standing up to join her. "Blessed with friends and blessed with children who make us proud every day." He gestured to the table. "To Haley," he said, raising his glass. "Our rock, a wonderful mother and a pillar of support." Haley smiled and gave a little wave, basking in the applause. "And to Owen," Matthew continued, "our innovator, always pushing boundaries, always teaching us to dream big." Owen nodded, looking solemn and important. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Say it," I prayed, "just say my name, just acknowledge me." Matthew paused. He looked out over the crowd. He looked right past the kids' table in the dark corner. "And to all of you," he finished. "Our extended family, thank you for being here." He sat down. They hadn't even mentioned me. It wasn't just an omission. It was a statement: "You are not one of us. You are the mechanic who fixes the car, not the passenger who rides in it." I looked down at the table. My niece, Sophie, had just spilled apple juice all over the white tablecloth. It was dripping onto my lap. "Auntie Eva," she wailed, "it's wet." I looked up at the head table. Haley was laughing at something Owen whispered. Adeline was preening. The antagonist of my story wasn't a villain in a cape. It was a woman in an emerald dress who would happily bleed me dry to water her own ego. It was a father who couldn't see past his own reflection in his son's eyes. Adeline caught my eye from across the room. She made a subtle, sharp gesture with her hand, pointing at Sophie, then pointing at the door. "Take her out. She's making noise." I felt a strange calmness wash over me. It was the icy, professional detachment I used when dealing with unruly hotel guests who thrashed rooms and abused staff. I stood up. I didn't pick up Sophie. I didn't grab a napkin. I looked at the chaos of the kids' table, then I looked at the opulence of the head table. I wasn't a daughter tonight. I was the regional director, and I had just spotted a violation of the venue's terms and conditions. The shift was instantaneous. The frantic pounding of my heart slowed to a cold, steady rhythm. The urge to cry, to beg, to cause a scene, it evaporated, replaced by the detached precision of my professional self. I looked at Sophie, who was still crying over the spilled juice. I didn't reach for a napkin. Instead, I signaled one of the waitstaff, a young man named Carlos whom I had hired personally 6 months ago. He hurried over, his eyes wide with panic as he saw the mess. "Ms. Whitaker, I am so sorry, let me get a towel." "No need, Carlos," I said, my voice smooth and low. "Please escort Sophie to her mother at the head table. She's upset and needs her parents." Carlos blinked, confused. "But Mrs. Adeline said the children were to stay here with you." "Plans change," I said, offering him a tight, unyielding smile. "Take her to Haley, now." He nodded, sensing the shift in the air, and gently guided the sobbing child toward the front of the room. I watched as Haley's perfect composure cracked when a sticky, crying toddler was deposited next to her sequined gown. She shot a furious glare in my direction, but I was already moving. I walked out of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a satisfying thud, muting the applause that had just erupted for the salad course. The hallway was quiet. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of polished wood and fresh lilies. I pulled my phone from my clutch and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Front desk, this is Sarah speaking. How may I assist you?" "Sarah, it's Eva. Is David in his office?" David was the general manager of the Grand Obsidian. He was a good man, fair but firm, and he owed his position to my recommendation 3 years ago when the regional board wanted to bring in an outsider. He respected the hierarchy. "Ms. Whitaker." "Yes, he's just finishing up the weekly P&L report." "Shall I put you through?" "No," I said, walking toward the elevators. "I'm coming down to the lobby. Meet me in his office in 5 minutes. And Sarah, pull the contract for the Whitaker Anniversary Gala from the system. have it ready on his desk. Of course, Ms. Whitaker, is everything all right? Everything is about to be corrected, I said, and hung up. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into the war room. My mind was racing, cataloging every detail of the agreement I had signed. The family and friends discount was heavily contingent on my active employment and sponsorship. But more importantly, the venue rental waiver, the $25,000 gift, was processed under a specific corporate code. Executive Discretionary Marketing Event. Technically, for tax purposes, this party was a marketing expense for the hotel, justified by the potential business leads in the room. It was a gray area I often used for high-profile community events. But tonight, looking at the guest list filled with retired golf buddies and stay-at-home moms, the marketing value was non-existent. I stepped out into the lobby and strode toward the administrative wing. The glass doors of the executive suite slid open, and I walked straight into David's office. He looked up, surprised, pulling his glasses off his nose. "Eva, I thought you were upstairs celebrating. You look." He trailed off, noticing the set of my jaw. "The contract, David," I said, gesturing to the file Sarah had placed on his desk. He handed it to me. I flipped it open. There it was in black and white. Client, Eva Whitaker/Whitaker family. Billing, internal account 8842 exec promo. Status, complimentary. "I need to make an amendment to the billing status," I said, pulling a pen from his desk holder. "An amendment? Now, the event is live, Eva. The entrees are dropping in 20 minutes. "Exactly," I said. "I am revoking the executive sponsorship effective immediately." David stared at me. "Eva, if you revoke the sponsorship, the system automatically reverts to the standard rack rate. That bill will jump from 0 to nearly $50,000, plus the mandatory 22% service charge." "I am aware," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. The clients, Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Whitaker, misrepresented the nature of the event. It is not a business networking function. It is a private family party. As such, it does not qualify for the corporate waiver. David looked at the monitor, then back at me. He saw something in my eyes, the hurt buried under layers of steel. He didn't ask questions, he just nodded slowly. "Okay, so who is the new guarantor for the payment?" "The hosts," I said, "Matthew and Adeline Whitaker, and the co-hosts Haley and Owen Whitaker. Split the bill 4 ways." I wrote their names on the amendment form and signed my initials next to the cancellation of the comp code. "One more thing," I added. "Since the account is no longer corporate, the credit terms are void. Standard policy for private events without a credit history." David winced. "Immediate payment required upon completion of service. Or, immediate suspension of service if payment cannot be verified." "Precisely," I said. "Please have the banquet manager, Marco, bring the updated invoice to the head table. Discreetly, of course. But inform them that the card on file, my corporate card, has been declined for this transaction. They need to provide a valid form of payment for the full amount. Immediately." David hesitated. "Eva, this is your parents' anniversary. This is going to stop the party cold." "They wanted a memorable night," I said, turning to leave. "I'm just giving them the bill for it." I didn't go back into the ballroom. I couldn't bear to sit at table 19 again. Instead, I went to the mezzanine balcony that overlooked the ballroom entrance. From here, I had a perfect view of the double doors and the lobby area where the guests would spill out when things went south. 10 minutes passed. I watched on the security monitor feed on my phone, which I had access to as regional director. Inside the ballroom, the waiters were clearing the salad plates. The mood was jovial. Matthew was standing again, microphone in hand, likely telling another anecdote about his financial acumen. Then, the doors opened. Marco, the banquet manager, walked in. He looked terrified. He was carrying a black leather bill folder. He walked straight up to the head table, right in the middle of Matthew's speech. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. Matthew stopped talking, annoyed at the interruption. He waved Marco away. Marco didn't move. He leaned in and whispered something to Matthew. Matthew laughed, a big, booming laugh that surely echoed through the room. He shook his head and pointed toward the back of the room, toward table 19. He was looking for me. Marco shook his head and tapped the folder. Adeline leaned over, her smile faltering. Haley and Owen looked confused. Marco opened the folder and presented the invoice. Even on the small screen of my phone, I saw the color drain from Matthew's face. It was as if someone had pulled a plug. He slumped into his chair. Adeline snatched the paper from him. She read it, then stood up so abruptly her chair nearly tipped over. She was shouting now. I could see her mouth moving sharp, angry movements. She was pointing at Marco, then pointing at the ceiling. Then pointing at her husband. I texted Marco, "Do not engage, standard policy, payment or pause." Inside the ballroom, Marco stepped back and signaled to the head waiter. The waiter nodded and spoke into his headset. Suddenly, the parade of servers carrying the main course, the filet mignon, stopped. They turned around and marched back into the kitchen. The room went still. The guests started looking around, whispering. Why was the food leaving? Why was the host screaming at the manager? My phone buzzed. It was Adeline. "Where are you? Get in here now. There is a mistake with the bill." I ignored it. Then Matthew called, then Haley. "Eva, pick up the phone. Mom is freaking out. They say the bill is $52,000. You said this was taken care of." I watched as Adeline grabbed her purse and marched out of the ballroom, Matthew and my siblings trailing behind her like ducklings. They burst into the lobby, their faces flushed with a mix of rage and panic. I stood up from the bench on the mezzanine and walked to the railing, looking down at them. "Eva!" Adeline shrieked, spotting me. Her voice echoed off the marble walls, drawing the attention of every guest in the lobby. "Get down here. This incompetent manager is trying to ruin our night. He says we owe $50,000. I walked down the grand staircase slowly, savoring the click of my heels. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. When I reached the bottom, I stood in front of them. My family, the people who had sat me with the toddlers. "There's no mistake, Mother," I said calmly. "The bill is correct." "What are you talking about?" Owen snapped, stepping forward aggressively. "You said you handled it. You said it was comped." "I did," I said. "I used my corporate privilege to cover the cost. A privilege reserved for partners, investors, and valued assets of the company." I looked at Matthew. "But tonight, I realized something. I'm not a partner to you. I'm not a valued asset. I'm the babysitter." "Oh, for God's sake, Eva." Adeline threw her hands up. "Is this about the seating chart? Are you seriously doing this because of a chair? You are so petty. It was a logistical issue." "It was a statement," I corrected her. "You sat me at the children's table while you toasted to family unity. You erased me from the head table while eating the food I paid for. You humiliated me in front of 200 people." "We didn't humiliate you." Haley scoffed. "You're being dramatic. We just didn't think you'd mind helping with the kids. You're good at that sort of thing, service." "Exactly," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm in service, and right now I am serving you the bill." "We're not paying this." Matthew roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I don't have $50,000 lying around for a dinner party. You fix this, Eva. You fix this right now, or so help me God." "Or what?" I asked, tilting my head. "You'll cut me out of the will. You'll stop inviting me to holidays where I cook and clean while you watch football. You have nothing to threaten me with, Dad. I pay my own bills. I built my own career. I don't need you." I turned to Marco, who was standing respectfully by the reception desk. "Marco, have they provided a card?" "No, Ms. Whitaker." "Then the event is concluded," I said. "Please inform the kitchen to halt service, and ask security to assist the guests in exiting the ballroom." "You can't do that." Adeline screamed, grabbing my arm, her nails dug into my skin. "Our friends are in there, the Westcotts, the mayor. You will humiliate us." I looked at her hand on my arm, then up into her eyes. "You should have thought about that before you sat the regional director at the kids' table." The lobby of the Grand Obsidian had transformed into a theater of the absurd. Adeline was sobbing theatrically into a handkerchief. Matthew was shouting into his cell phone, presumably trying to move funds or call a lawyer who wouldn't answer on a Saturday night, and my siblings were staring at me with a mixture of hatred and genuine confusion. They had never seen me like this. They didn't know this Eva. You're ruining everything. Haley hissed, stepping close to me. Do you know how bad this looks for Mark? He has partners in that room. If we get kicked out, he'll be a laughingstock. Then perhaps Mark should pay the bill, I suggested coolly. He's a partner, isn't he? Surely $12,500 is a drop in the bucket for a man of his stature. Haley recoiled. We can't afford that. We just bought the summer house. And Owen. I looked at my brother. The visionary entrepreneur. Surely your app can finance your share. Owen looked away, scuffing his expensive dress shoe on the carpet. Cash flow is tight right now, Eva, you know that. So, I said, my voice ringing clear in the lobby. None of you can afford the lifestyle you're parading in there. You're all broke. You're all frauds. And you were counting on me, the service girl, to subsidize your delusions of grandeur. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Eva, Matthew said, his voice trembling, trying a different tactic. He put on his disappointed father face. We are family. We make mistakes. Maybe the seating was an oversight, but you don't destroy your family over a mistake. You fix it, that's what family does. Family, I laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. Family is what you toasted to in there while I wiped apple juice off my dress in the corner. You don't want family, Dad. You want a financier. You want a staff member who doesn't ask for a paycheck. I pulled out my phone. I have the cancellation confirmation right here. I can press confirm, and the lights in the ballroom go up, the music stops, and the PA system announces the end of the event. Or. I paused. Or what? Adeline looked up, hope flaring in her tear-stained eyes. Or you can go back in there, I said, and explain to your guests why the regional director of the hotel has just resigned from the Whitaker Family Planning Committee. You can explain that there was a misunderstanding with the billing because the host, you, Dad, forgot to secure the funds. I can't tell them I forgot to pay. Matthew gasped. Then tell them the truth, I said. Tell them you tried to exploit your daughter, and she finally said no. Suddenly, the ballroom doors swung open again, but it wasn't a guest. It was Mrs. Gable, the wife of the bank president who held the mortgage on my parents' house. She looked around the lobby, spotted us, and frowned. Adeline, Matthew, is everything all right? The waiters are taking the wine glasses away. People are getting confused. Adeline froze. This was her worst nightmare. A crack in the facade in front of the one person who controlled their financial destiny. It's just a technicality, Susan. Adeline stammered, wiping her eyes. A mix-up with the bank transfer. Actually, I interrupted, stepping forward. It's not a technicality. I looked Mrs. Gable in the eye. I knew her. I had organized her daughter's wedding last year. She liked me. Mrs. Gable, I apologize for the disruption. My parents seem to have overextended themselves for this celebration. The hotel requires payment to continue service, and unfortunately, their credit has been declined. Mrs. Gable's eyebrows shot up. She looked from me to my sweating, panicked father. Declined, she repeated, for a $50,000 party. Eva, Matthew shouted, lunging for me, but Mark held him back. It appears so, I said. I've tried to help, but as per corporate policy, I cannot authorize further debt on an account with insufficient funds. Debt, Mrs. Gable murmured. Matthew, I thought you said your portfolio was outperforming the market this quarter. Matthew was turning a pale shade of gray. The house of cards wasn't just wobbling, it was collapsing. It is. Matthew sputtered. Eva is lying, she's disgruntled. I have the invoice right here, I said, holding up the folder Marco had given me. And the declined authorization. Mrs. Gable looked at the folder, then at Matthew. Her expression shifted from confusion to cold, professional scrutiny. Matthew, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. We need to have a meeting on Monday about the collateral on the loan. She turned and walked back into the ballroom. The silence she left behind was absolute. My parents looked at me with pure horror. I had just exposed their financial fragility to the one person who could foreclose on their home. You little witch, Adeline hissed. You just cost us everything." "No, Mother," I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I just stopped paying for it." I turned to Marco. "Shut it down." The words "shut it down" echoed in the lobby like a gunshot. Marco nodded, his face grim but professional, and tapped the earpiece he wore. "Lights up, music off, service discontinued. Security to the doors, please." Through the glass doors of the ballroom, I watched the transformation. The warm, intimate amber lighting snapped to a harsh, fluorescent glare. The soft jazz that had been playing in the background cut out abruptly, replaced by the jarring silence of 200 confused guests. Adeline let out a strangled cry and rushed toward the doors, her heels clacking frantically on the marble. Matthew stumbled after her, his face a mask of panic. Haley and Owen, paralyzed by the sheer scale of the disaster, just stood there, staring at me as if I had grown a second head. I followed them, not to participate, but to witness. I stood just inside the threshold, leaning against a pillar, my arms crossed. The scene inside was chaotic. Guests were looking around, shielding their eyes from the bright lights. Waiters were efficiently clearing the tables, taking away half-eaten appetizers and untouched wine glasses. Matthew reached the microphone at the head table, tapping it frantically. Everyone, please," his voice boomed, slightly distorted by the feedback. "Please remain seated, just a small technical difficulty. We are sorting this out." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Fix this, Eva, please," but I didn't move, I just watched. Then a voice cut through the murmurs. It was Mrs. Westcott, the formidable matriarch of the town's social circle, standing up at table 4. "Matthew," she called out, her voice carrying easily without a microphone. "Is it true? Is the party over?" Matthew stammered. No, absolutely not. Just a misunderstanding with the hotel management." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said, my voice clear and calm. "I didn't need a microphone." I projected my voice the way I did during staff briefings for 500 employees. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I stepped away from the pillar and walked toward the center of the room. I didn't look angry. I didn't look sad. I looked like the regional director. "The event has been canceled due to non-payment," I announced, addressing the guests directly. "The hosts, my parents, were unable to cover the costs of the evening. As per hotel policy, we cannot continue service." Gasps rippled through the room. "Liar!" Adeline screamed, rushing at me from the side. "She's lying. She's doing this to spite us. She's jealous." "Jealous?" I asked, turning to face her. "Jealous of what, Mother? The debt, the lies, the way you treat your own daughter." I gestured to the back of the room, to table 19. "You sat me at the children's table," I said, my voice rising slightly. "At my own expense. I paid for this room. I paid for the flowers. I paid for the wine you're drinking. And you sat me next to the kitchen because you didn't think I was important enough to sit with the adults." The guests turned to look at the small, sad table in the corner with the crayons, then back to Adeline. The embarrassment on her face was visceral. She likes children." Adeline shrieked, desperate. It was a favor. "It was a humiliation," I corrected. "And it ends now. I am retracting my financial support. If you want this party to continue, you can pay the $52,000 invoice right now." I held out the black folder Marco had given me earlier. "Who wants to pay?" I asked the room. "Matthew, Adeline, Haley, Owen." Silence. Haley looked down at her shoes. Owen pretended to check his phone. Matthew looked like he was about to have a stroke. "No one?" I asked. I turned back to the guests. "I apologize for the inconvenience. Please feel free to visit the hotel bar in the lobby. The first round is on me, but this event is over." Mrs. Gable stood up again. She looked at Matthew with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Matthew," she said quietly, "I think we're done here." She picked up her purse and walked out. That broke the dam. One by one, then in groups, the guests stood up. They avoided eye contact with my parents. They whispered to each other as they filed out. "I can't believe it. Broke, but he talks about his investments constantly. Sitting her at the kids' table, after she paid, that's awful." My parents stood alone on the dance floor, surrounded by empty tables and the ruin of their reputation. Adeline was sobbing into Matthew's shoulder. Haley and Owen were arguing with their spouses in hushed, angry tones. I walked up to them one last time. "Happy anniversary," I said, and then I turned and walked out, leaving them in the bright, unforgiving light of their own making. By Monday morning, the news of the gala disaster had spread through our small town's social grapevine like wildfire. Matthew's reputation as a savvy investor evaporated overnight. Mrs. Gable followed through on her promise. The bank called in the loan on their house, citing material misrepresentation of assets after discovering Matthew had been using credit lines to fund their lifestyle, expecting me to bail them out eventually. They lost the house. Adeline had to move into a small condo, which she complained about incessantly to anyone who would listen, which was a shrinking list of people. Haley and Mark's marriage took a significant hit. It turned out Mark wasn't as oblivious as he seemed. He was furious that Haley had concealed her parents' financial instability, which he felt reflected poorly on his own judgment. They started counseling, and for the first time, Haley had to get a job. She's working as a receptionist at a dental clinic now. I hear she hates it. Owen moved to a different state. His app never launched, and without my parents to fund his ventures, he had to take a job in sales. We haven't spoken since that night. As for me, I didn't lose my job. In fact, David, the general manager, promoted me. He said I showed exceptional crisis management skills and unwavering integrity. I'm now the vice president of operations for the entire region. I moved out of my apartment and bought a small house with a garden, something I had always wanted but put off because I was saving money, in case the family needed it. I stopped saving for them. 6 months after the party, I received a letter from Adeline. It was a long, rambling, handwritten note. It didn't apologize for the table. It didn't apologize for the years of neglect. Instead, it was a guilt trip about how hard it was to downsize and how lonely they were. "We miss you, Eva. We just want our family back. Can't we put this behind us?" I sat in my new garden, drinking a cup of coffee, and read it twice. I thought about the sticky table. I thought about the way they looked through me. I thought about the $50,000 I had almost spent on people who didn't even know my favorite color. I took out a pen and wrote a simple reply on a piece of hotel stationery. "I'm afraid that reservation has been permanently canceled." I mailed it the next morning. I still work at the Grand Obsidian. Sometimes, when there's a big wedding or a gala, I walk through the ballroom before the guests arrive. I check the tables. I make sure the lighting is perfect. And I always check table 19. It's just a table now, but to me, it's a monument. It's the place where I finally stood up. It's the place where I learned that my worth isn't determined by where people sit me, but by where I choose to stand. And I'm standing tall.